Other religions certainly have emphases of some people who are born of a divine being and a human being. And as an example, in the ancient world, Apollonius of Tyana was understood. He's a philosopher. He's not particularly a religious leader, but he was understood that he was miraculously born, that a god got his mother pregnant, and he could do miracles and heal the sick and cast out demons and raise the dead and ascended to heaven when he died. And so it's a very similar story to Jesus. And so the idea that you could have a figure, and also in Greco-Roman mythology, some of the demigods, like Heracles or Hercules, is kind of half god because his father is Zeus or Jupiter. You find a lot in Greek and Roman mythology, but you also find it with historical figures. I mean, Plato, the philosopher Plato, is Pythagoras, the philosopher Pythagoras, Alexander the Great. I mean, these are people who said that their parents actually were divine beings. Chapter 7, verse 14, a young woman is conceived and will bear a son, and you'll call his name God is with us. The Hebrew word is Alma. The woman is called an Alma, which is just a word for a young woman. But the word doesn't mean virgin. It doesn't mean a woman who's never had sex. There's a different Hebrew word for that, Bethula. And Isaiah doesn't say that. When the Greek translators of the Old Testament translated the passage, they used a word that can mean young woman, Parthenos. When Matthew is writing his account of Jesus' birth, he's using the Greek translation, and he uses Parthenos, and he thinks that it means woman who's never had sex.
Welcome back to the Gnostic Informant, and you are about to attain true gnosis. And today, I'm with the man who needs no introduction. Everyone watching my channel knows Dr. Bart, one of the greats of our time. And when we talk about these topics of biblical studies and ancient history, mythology stuff, and this is a topic that I really am excited about. I'm definitely going to be at this course. You guys need to sign up for this course. Links in the description. Other virgin births in antiquity. Like, this is such a hot topic for my channel because we get into all these different comparative mythology stuff. And so now we have Dr. Bart talking about this, and this is going to be on the course. So definitely check out the course. And without further ado, let me get into my first question. Before we even get into any of these other births, I want to ask you about the word virgin in the Old Testament and how it appears in the Hebrew versus the Greek, which becomes sort of a theme in the New Testament because obviously Jesus is born of a virgin. Is this a mistake? Is this on purpose? What is your thoughts on the Greek Septuagint versus the Hebrew Masoretic text for this Isaiah prophecy?
So the passage it's in Isaiah chapter 7. And to understand what's going on in Isaiah, you have to know something about what's going on in the context of this verse. What people do is they rip it out of context and don't understand, which is what Matthew did. He took it out of its context. In the context, Isaiah is called in to talk with the king of Israel, because of Judea, because the city Jerusalem is surrounded by enemies, and he's worried he's going to be wiped out. And Isaiah is telling him that he's not going to be wiped out. God's going to deliver him from this, and he's going to give him a sign. And the sign is that a young woman who is pregnant is going to have a child. And before the child is very old at all, these two kingdoms will disappear and will no longer be a threat. When Isaiah says that, he says that chapter 7, verse 14, a young woman is conceived and will bear a son, and you'll call his name God is with us. And so the Hebrew word is Alma. The woman is called an Alma, which is just a word for a young woman. It can mean virgin in the sense that many young women are virgins, but the word doesn't mean virgin. It doesn't mean a woman who's never had sex. There's a different Hebrew word for that, Bethula, and Isaiah doesn't say that. And Isaiah doesn't say she's going to become pregnant. He says that she's already. So he's talking about a woman, maybe somebody standing there saying, "Look, this woman, is pregnant before her child's very old." When the Greek translators of the Old Testament translated the passage, they used a word that can mean young woman, Parthenos, but it's also a word that could mean a woman who's never had sex. And later it came to take on that meaning more strongly. When Matthew is writing his account of Jesus' birth, he's using the Greek translation, and he uses Parthenos, and he thinks that it means woman who's never had sex. And so in Matthew's version, then, this woman who's never had sex is the fulfillment of what Isaiah is predicting, even though Isaiah doesn't talk about a woman who's never had sex and doesn't talk about a prediction of a woman who's going to give birth later, but somebody who's living in his own time.
Wow. So in your honest opinion, do you think this is a big deal that Christianity sort of grows out of a translation? I want to say mistake, but just a translation change? Yeah. Or do you think that this is not a big deal?
Well, for one thing, I don't think Christianity ever depended on the virgin birth story.
Sure.
There were Christians around. Of the 27 books in the New Testament, only 2 mentioned the virgin birth. And so all the other books have nothing to do with it. Paul doesn't seem to know about it. Mark doesn't say anything. The Gospel of Mark, the Gospel of John doesn't say anything about it. So these authors don't think that the virgin birth is a critical component of the Christian faith. And so I wouldn't say that Christianity grew out of a mistranslation. I would say that the doctrine of the virgin birth may have originated from this misunderstanding of Matthew. Or another option is that you get the virgin birth in Luke as well. The stories are completely different. It's impossible to reconcile Matthew's account with Luke's account, but they both have a virgin birth. But in Luke, it's not to fulfill Scripture. In Luke, the virgin birth shows that Jesus' Father really is God. In other words, he's literally the Son of God. That's not Matthew's point, but that's Luke's point. And it could be that the story started that way, with somebody saying, look, Jesus really had God as his father, and then somebody came up with the virgin birth story.
Interesting, because this gets into the next topic, which is other ancient people or gods, whatever, whether they're humans or gods. There's a lot of these stories of other miraculous or virgin births. Some of them are not as true as others. People say that Mithra was born of a virgin, even though there's no text of that. What are some examples of texts that we do have? Some prime examples of actual virgin births?
Well, that's going to be the topic of my webinar. And I'll tell you the question I'm going to deal with without giving you the answer.
Sure.
The question is closely related to what you're saying, which is that if you go on the internet or you just talk to people, not just mythicists, but I mean, just like, and a lot of people will say, yeah, there are lots of virgin births in the ancient world. And they'll list them, you give you the list of Hercules, and Romulus and Alexander the Great and Plato, and so you get this list. And so what is absolutely true that everybody has to concede is that there are stories back there in Greek and Roman mythology of a god getting a woman pregnant. And so you find a lot in Greek and Roman mythology, but you also find it with historical figures. I mean, Plato, the philosopher Plato, Pythagoras, the philosopher Pythagoras, Alexander the Great. I mean, these are people who said that their parents actually were divine beings. And so there's no doubt that happens all over the place. My question is, that I'll be dealing with in the webinar is, were any of these women virgins? In other words, were they virgin? Had they ever had sex before? And so I think that's a more interesting question. I mean, it's very interesting that you have these accounts of divine beings getting mortal beings pregnant. That's really interesting and very, very important. But it's also important and interesting to ask, is any of them a virgin? And if so, then are Christians just ripping it off from everybody else? And if not, then why are Christians coming up with this? In other words, what are they trying to emphasize that might be different from someone else? And so those are the kinds of issues I'll be dealing with.
Wow, I can't wait for that. Let me ask you about Jesus historically and how is I know we don't have a lot of sources for this. I know a lot of this stuff might come later, it might come a century or two later, but how do people respond to this virgin birth? Are there anyone saying that, no, he really was out of adultery, something like that? Do we have any instances of something like that?
Yeah, it turns out in Christian circles early on, there were some Christian groups who said that Jesus was not born of a virgin. Some Jewish Christians famously thought that Joseph and Mary had sex and they had a baby, and it's Jesus. And he just happened to grow up more righteous than anyone, and so God chose him to be his Messiah. There were Jewish Christian groups that said that. But they ended up getting quashed by the end of the 2nd century or so. I mean, not completely quashed, but there were non-Christians who were saying that Jesus did have an unusual birth, but it's because he was born out of wedlock. And so you get these traditions that go back at least into the 2nd century that are in both Jewish and pagan circles that Jesus was an illegitimate child. And there's a specific rumor that his mother Mary was raped by a Roman soldier, who sometimes named Panthera. And so you get accounts of this in the 2nd century, and so it becomes an issue throughout. I mean, people know about this. Some people know about this throughout history, down to the life of Brian. Which, in the life of Brian, there's it's clear this playing on this with Brian's own parentage. So you do get people saying that, yeah, there's something else going on. And one interesting question is, if that's an older tradition, let's say that of the 27 books in the New Testament, only 2 mention a virgin birth. In a couple of places, in both Mark and John, there's some suggestion that maybe there was something weird going on about his birth. And so some people thought, well, maybe he was born illegitimately, and then somebody came up with a virgin birth story to explain the weirdness of his birth. Oh no, it wasn't that they didn't know his father was. It's because God was his father. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
That may be one of the explanations for why you get a virgin birth story.
I know Celsus is one of the early mid-2nd century authors who is hostile to Christianity. He mentions this about this Yeshua ben Pandera thing, and he says that his sources are from the Jews.
Yeah.
Is this credible? Do people criticize? Is this a thing that scholars take seriously?
That he was born of a Roman soldier?
No, not just that, but that the sources come from the Jews.
Oh, yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That's interesting. Now, if that's the case, do you think that the evidence for this do we have sources that go back to 1st century? Is it 2nd century, or is it later?
About this rumor about
his father, about the Pantera
Pantera thing. The earliest reference we get is in the 2nd century. Celsus is writing about the year 170, and he's basing this on earlier. So sometime in the mid-2nd century, at least, we know that this was a story that was floating around. It is often thought that it is that there's a linguistic reason for this particular story. Panthera, the alleged name of this Roman soldier, sounds similar to the word Parthenos, Panthera, Parthenos, and so so Parthenos means virgin.
Right.
And so what's often thought is that Christians are saying he's born of a Parthenos, and that it's translated he's born to Panthera. And so that's possible. Let me just say for the record, the chance that Jesus coming out of Nazareth was born of a woman who was raped by a Roman soldier is virtually nil. There were no soldiers posted in that part of the world. The Roman soldiers weren't playing. Everybody imagines Roman soldiers, they're all over Israel, in the days of Jesus, standing on every corner, making sure people don't do something wrong. They weren't. The Roman soldiers were stationed off in Syria. They didn't have to be inside. They just had to protect against invasion. And so Jesus himself probably never saw Roman soldiers in his entire life until he got crucified by some of them. And so there's almost no chance that some girl in Nazareth got raped by a Roman soldier, I think.
That's interesting because it's kind of like you pointed out, the 2 words Parthenos and Pantera very similar. And who's the first person to come along and say no, it's not Pantera, you're just getting the word Parthenos mixed up? Or
I don't know the answer to that. I don't know when that I don't know when that linguistic connection is made. I don't really know. It's a great question. I should find out. I don't know. I don't know if it's in the ancient world or not.
Yeah, that would be interesting to know. Now, last thing I want to talk about is outside of Christianity in this virgin prophecy thing, is there significance coming from other religions about a virgin giving birth? Some sort of is this a thing that not just Christianity but other religions are taking seriously for someone who's divine or somebody who's like the chosen one or something like that?
Other religions certainly have emphases of some people who are born of a divine being and a human being. I mean, as an example, in the ancient world, Apollonius of Tyana was understood. He's a philosopher. He's not particularly a religious leader, but he was understood that he could that he was miraculously born. That a god got his mother pregnant, and he could do miracles and heal the sick and cast out demons and raise the dead, and he ascended to heaven when he died. And so it's very similar story to Jesus. And so the idea that you could have a figure, and also in Greco-Roman mythology, some of the demigods, like Heracles or Hercules, is kind of half god because his father is Zeus or Jupiter. So you certainly get that. And one of the questions on what I want to deal with in the seminar is, are any of these virgin births, and is the virgin birth tradition, not just as a god, not just, I mean, a god getting a mortal pregnant would be a pretty big deal. So I'm not just saying just, but I am saying, is it that the woman's a virgin? Does that play any role in these other religions or not? And so that's what I'll be talking about.
Wow, that's exciting. I can't wait for this course. I'm just going to real quick just run down some of the topics that are going to be in this course. One of the questions, what does it mean for someone to say someone was born of a virgin? Apart from Jesus, what else in the ancient world who is said literally to have a god for his father, but a mortal for his mother? And what do our sources say about miraculous famous births such as Hercules, Romulus, Alexander the Great, Apollonius of Tyana? And lastly, were their mothers virgins? And if so, what makes them different than Jesus? I love it. I can't wait for this course. Links in the description. Thank you again, Dr. Bart, and you have just attained true gnosis.
You have just attained true gnosis. The demiurge has no power over